Thank you, everybody. So before we begin, a quick note. The information shared today is for educational purposes only and is not medical advice. Please consult a licensed medical professional for any health concerns. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Judy Benjamin and Lisa Feiner. Judy Benjamin was diagnosed with Alzheimer's at the age of 67. Through major diet and lifestyle changes, she became Dr. Dale Bredesen's first success story, his original patient zero. Fueled by purpose, Judy became a national board certified health and wellness coach and a ReCode certified coach with Apollo Health. At age 81, Judy walked 3,000 miles from California to Florida to raise awareness that there is treatment for Alzheimer's and dementia, and is now organizing a similar walk in the UK. Lisa Feiner is a founder of Sharp Again, a national board certified health and wellness coach, brain longevity specialist, and a ReCode certified coach with more than 25 years of experience working with clients on a wide range of health concerns. She is co-editor of the book Minding Your Memory, What You Can Do Now to Prevent Dementia and Stay Sharp for Life, and speaks locally and nationally to change the conversation around dementia through education, prevention, and lifestyle-based interventions. So welcome again. Thank you for joining us, everybody. We will have time for questions at the end, and we ask that you please put your questions into the chat box.
Thanks so much, Jessica. Are you going to spotlight us?
Yes, it is on speaker mode. We can see you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I just have to say, really, what an honor it is, Judy, to have you with us today and to share your experience with us, not only of restoring your cognition and helping others, but also becoming an advocate and an activist in letting people know what is truly possible. So let's just start off by asking if you could share what your life looks like today compared to when you were struggling with memory loss.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa, and thank you for having me on as a guest on your podcast. It's an honor for me to be here as well. I have long admired what Sharp Again does, and so I'm happy to be here. My life today is very, very different from the way it was years ago when I was diagnosed. I was struggling like most people, and if you have listeners who know somebody or close to someone who has had a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, they certainly know what I mean. It's the most devastating thing that ever happened to me, because I felt like that my life was going to be over. I could see it going in the same direction that my own mother went through. She was diagnosed and suffered with Alzheimer's for 20 years. So I watched her decline, and I knew very well when I started to get symptoms that I did not want to go down that same path. So I was very willing to do whatever was necessary to turn that around. And luckily, I discovered through a friend of mine who knew Dr. Dale Bredesen, she said, you must go to California and talk to this doctor who's had great research results in terms of reversing Alzheimer's. And at that point, I had no other choice. And I said, well, of course. And I flew out from New York to San Francisco. And I met with Dr. Bredesen for about almost 3 hours. And he told me about his research. At the time, honestly, it went in one ear and out the other. I was really not capable of understanding or comprehending what he was talking about. But I paid close attention and I took notes, and I went home and I started to follow what he had suggested. So that was the beginning for me of a turnaround from really terrible symptoms. I had lost my memory, my short-term memory completely. I couldn't remember people's names. I couldn't remember my street address, my house number, my phone number, let alone my social security number or any of the other important numbers that we all commit to memory. And
Judy, had you gotten a diagnosis at that point?
I had gotten a diagnosis. Yes, I visited my own personal doctor. And at that point, I had not had any scans, but I had the symptoms. And having seen them close up, I knew what they were. And so I visited my doctor, and she basically told me, sort of right off the bat, well, you have what your mom had, and there's nothing really I can do, you know. I mean, she told me to go get my affairs in order, take trips, you know, be with friends, be with family. And I think this is the most disheartening message that anyone can get, because that's not what you want to hear at that point. But it turned out in my case that notes that her physician's notes that are always put into your file. And I didn't realize until later how important those notes were, because I did apply for a long-term care insurance, and it was New York Life Insurance, I believe it was. And when they got the notes, they said, "Nope, sorry, you know, your file says that you have early Alzheimer's," and so that was denied coverage, which is fine. I mean, they lost because I'm 82 today and I was 67 then, and they could have gotten money all that time for expensive long-term care, and they didn't get it from me. So here I am. But anyway.
We're so glad to hear that. You know, I know people are going to have questions as we go through this interview, and we will take them at the end. We'll leave some time. So if you want to put them in the chat as we go, then Jessica at the end will reference the questions, and we can ask Judy. So Judy, what were the first 2 or 3 changes that you made that you think had the biggest impact?
Well, I mean, that's a great question, but it's a hard one to answer because I was in such a bad state of taking care of myself that Dr. Bredesen said to me at one point, he said, if I made a list of all the things that you want to do to get Alzheimer's, you checked all the boxes. You know, I lived in a moldy home. I had a terrible diet. I was living in a high stress, worked in a very stressful career overseas most of the time. I didn't sleep. I used to brag about, oh, I only need 3 or 4 hours of sleep at night. And I had done that for years and years and years, not realizing that my brain was being deprived of that period of rest where it needs to rejuvenate itself. And also, I wasn't exercising. I was just kind of doing all the wrong things. So I had to take one by one and start changing things. When I got back from that trip to California, the first thing I was told to do basically was clean out my kitchen cabinets. I mean, I was one of those people who bought into the low-fat, artificial sweetener, Diet Coke, instant over-processed food. I mean, because I was so busy, you know, I just avail myself of that, and those were really nutritionally, they were not doing me any good. I also was advised to get blood tests, to get extensive tests to find out where my deficiencies were, because the theory is, and I think it's not, at this point, it's not just Dr. Bredesen's theory, it's many other well-known doctors who, Dr. Perlmutter or Mark Hyman, the Cleveland Clinic, even the CDC has come out with, you know, you've got to know what your deficiencies are and you've got to sort them out. So I was very deficient in things like vitamin D, by D3. I was deficient in all my B vitamins, B12. My inflammation indicators, my blood work that indicate inflammation was like off the chart. You know, I was extremely inflamed from a perspective of looking at the blood work. And so I did the blood tests. I also scheduled to have scans, which they occurred a little bit later because I was trying to maintain my work, and I worked overseas. I'm an anthropologist by training, And I had specialized in working in war zones and conflict zones. Just to give you a little stress, I was constantly wearing a flak jacket and people were shooting at us. But other than that, I would go into some of the USAID funded projects, like for refugee camps and community development, and do assessments to find out if the money was being spent properly. And so I was putting myself always in a dangerous situation. But anyway, so I didn't want to let it be known publicly. I didn't want to get an MRI or a PET. In those days, it was more a PET scan, because these later tests had not been developed yet, because that was 14 years ago, a little bit over 14 years. So I sort of sidestepped that for a little while, but I did eventually get the scans, which did reveal that I had a high level of amyloid plaque, and later I had a tau test, and I had that as well. But anyway, going forward, I started to exercise more. I signed up for yoga classes to deal with the stress. I started meditating, and I had to back off. I didn't want to, but I had to back off on my work, because I literally couldn't complete a report. I was always charged with doing assessments and then writing up the report. And I just was so disorganized. I couldn't remember anything that I'd read. I couldn't remember the research material. And I just basically, I stopped working. So then I had full time to devote on getting myself well. And that's exactly what I did.
Did you have anyone working with you or supporting you while you were making these changes?
Well, of course, my family. I have one adult son, and he's been very supportive throughout the whole situation. And I have a few really good old friends who have been friends. The one friend who recommended me in the first place to Dr. Bredesen, she's still my friend today, and I love her dearly. She saved my life, as did Dr. Bredesen, because if I hadn't changed, I am absolutely convinced that I would be dead or in a nursing home today. And of course, I'm far from that. My brain works today probably better than it ever has. Nobody's complaining about it so far. So the person who I reached out to was Dr. Bredesen, because realized he didn't have a protocol then. He didn't have patients. He was not a clinician. He was a researcher. So I was the mouse in the lab, but I was the human, the first human and non-mouse. And he was able to test his protocol on me. And I'll never forget that after about 3 or 4 months in, it was a Sunday, and I really felt like, wow, I've got my brain back. It was, it was slow, but it was starting to go. And I called Dr. Bredesen at home on a Sunday morning, and I said, I've got my brain back. It's working. I can remember my phone number. And he turned to his wife and he said, it works. It was like, I think he was as surprised in a way, although he's delighted as I was. And of course, that was kind of the beginning of a lot of things. We started out, and I would call him quite frequently because, some of the things in the beginning he recommended, I think it was only about 4 or 5 supplements that would, to get me going. And a couple of them made me woozy, made me dizzy. And I'd call him, I said, well, I can't take ashwagandha. What else can I do? And so together we kind of worked and developed what was working. And then when my blood work, of course, was done and we saw that I had deficiencies, then we were able to zero in on some of those things that were essentially assaulting my brain. I had to have mold remediation in my house. I lived in a beautiful old, over 100-year-old house, which, in the United States, that's old. I just came back from London where they said, well, that's not an old house. They have 300-year-old houses. But anyway, I had to move out of the house for a while. A lot of expense to remediate where leaks were coming in, both in the basement and in the roof around the fireplace chimney. So the mold was quite extensive, plus the fact that I had been working in places like Liberia and Afghanistan and Yemen, almost every place I stayed in had mold. I mean, the climate's there, the hot and the cold and lack of air conditioning and whatnot. So I was, and I'm also genetically in that group of, I think it's about 16% of the global population is missing the alleles that will help you eliminate toxins. And so, of course, I'm a member of that club. And I don't get rid of toxins very easily. I also learned later, when I had my DNA looked at and done, that I don't methylate. So it's very hard for me, even taking like a B12, my body just doesn't do the methylation. So I tend to really have an effect or a bad impact of these even air, things that are in the air, pollutants, pesticides, anything like that. So I really have had to work over the years on the mold issue. And it comes and goes. I mean, I'll go to a hotel someplace and think it's a new hotel and it's fine. And I walk in and I can start, my throat tightens, my eyes get red, my nose starts to run, and I know there's mold here somewhere because I'm getting a physical reaction to it. So that's been something to deal with. And I'm certainly not saying, and I wouldn't want anyone to get the idea that it's all about just mold. It isn't. I think for me, what I've learned is it's about the overall inflammation, and your brain reacts to it. And when it reacts to this inflammation, the plaque forms, and then later the tau forms, to the point where you don't get that, the neurons are not firing, and you're not getting that, that result with your brain functioning. So that's why for me, I started to really exercise a lot, because I learned that when you exercise, you not only get more oxygen to the brain, but the brain produces BDNF, the brain-derived neurotropic factors, which are really key factors to your brain working well. So I started to exercise every day. I still do various forms of exercise. Not suggesting everybody has to walk 3,000 miles, but I think you have to do something every day to have a working brain. This is my what I tell my clients when I'm coaching them, that you've got to move. You can't just sit and expect things to get better.
So Judy, many people experience memory lapses, and I think we've both seen in our roles as coaches that, or we've heard people say, well, people say, oh, don't worry about it, everyone has senior moments and things like that. But like, what would you tell people when they say, isn't this just aging? What and honestly, what are some things people should do if they think they have a problem?
Well, we all hear that I'm having a senior moment, or it's just a factor of aging. And I think that there is some truth in that, in the sense that as we age, we know that brains do shrink in size. We also know that when you're under stress or having anxiety, it's the same even for a young person. They're having a job interview, their hands sweat, they suddenly feel like they're really nervous. And when that cortisol goes up, I always say the brain power goes down because you're upset. But the idea that if you're, just because you're aging, that you're going to lose your memory is just not proven to be correct, because we all know, or we can learn, that there are many people in their 90s and even 100 who are very sharp. I mean, I know people like that. And so it certainly is not something that is going to happen to every older person. I think the other factor that comes into play there is that if you are not living a healthy lifestyle, if you are not moving, if you are eating a lot of highly processed food, if you aren't sleeping well, maybe you have sleep apnea, then that's added up as you get older. So the longer you do that, the chances are, you're going to have problems with it. Your brain won't work as well. And so that's one of the reasons I think that sometimes younger people can get away with a lot more than we can when we get older, because it's a cumulative effect. The effects are are cumulative. And, young people are more resilient in most cases. But, what we're seeing now, the result of people eating over-processed foods, even for young children, they're developing type 2 diabetes, they're developing high blood pressure. And the sad thing is they're really well on their way to not having their brains work. So it's something that really does concern me, what's going on in terms of our children and what their future is.
Yeah, we're seeing people diagnosed younger and younger with memory loss, and that speaks directly to what you're saying. And these effects, the cumulative effects that you're talking about, they're coming from many different places and in different ways. Unfortunately, we're subjected to them, and yet we also, which is the best part of what you're talking about, we have agency over what we eat and if we move, and if we decide to take steps to reduce our stress and to sleep better, all of these things, right? We have some agency over.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a great point. And I think that people sometimes forget about that, and they want to give over to doctors and to sort of what the general public is. Well, my doctor didn't tell me to do this, or my doctor never heard of Dr. Bredesen, and my doctor said that's hogwash. I have one client who went to a pretty well-known neurologist in New York, and the neurologist told him, he asked him, had you ever heard of Dr. Bredesen? And the doctor said, that's all hogwash. And so my client said, well, have you read any of his over 200 published scientific papers? No. Have you read any of his books? No. So it's something that people think there's nothing they can do. I mean, if I hear the saddest part that I hear most often from people is, well, I've got it, I've been diagnosed, and that's it. There's nothing I can do. And it's part of getting older anyway. And that's simply not true. I mean, it's just not the case. So it's hard to, kind of constantly fight that battle and tell people there are things, you can do about this. It's not just getting older. So
what would you recommend? Okay, so let's say people don't even have any signs of memory loss yet. Do you have recommendations for them as they get older?
Well, of course, because this isn't just about Alzheimer's. It's about aging without getting old, if that makes any sense. Chronologically, we're, every day we're going to get a day older, but that doesn't mean we have to walk around all hunched over and stooped over and feeling, I just told a really good friend in California, also another friend, we've been friends since we were in our 20s, and we were talking about how your posture, how you sit, how you stand, and how you walk can affect how you feel about yourself. And you can walk down the street and look in a mirror or a glass, and if you're walking like shuffling like an older person, you start to think and you start to act old. And so I always reject that. Now, I'm not saying that some people don't have physical reasons why they can't walk with a sprain. There are things that happen to people physically. There's arthritis, and other injuries and things. But I think you certainly can. I think what you said is very true. You have the agency to control what you put into your mouth. You have agency to control how often you move and get up and move around and exercise, and all of that. So that's where the responsibility does fall on the individual to take action and change. But, sadly, we get lazy. A lot of people just say, I have clients who said this, I don't want to give up my sweets. By the way, sugar is, to me, a big no-no. So it's not something that I think we really do have to all avoid. And it's very hard for some people because sugar goes into our pleasure center of our brain. It's like cocaine. And once you have a little, you want a lot more. And then a lot of us are brought up to be rewarded. Clean your plate and you get dessert. Well, that's not a good thing. It's not a good thing to say to people. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things that I run into in coaching people is they don't want to change their lifestyle. They don't want to give up a lot of bread. They don't want to give up sugar. They don't want to get a sleep study test to find out do they have sleep apnea or not. They'll say, oh, I sleep fine. Well, if you don't get good sleep, your brain doesn't have time to cleanse itself and get rid of the dead cells and the buildup. And it's not a choice that's going to lead you to a healthier life. So my answer to that is just if you keep doing the same things, but you're expecting a different result, you are going to be disappointed. And that's what people do. They just aren't willing to do the work. And is it easy? No, it's not easy. It's very hard. It's probably the hardest thing a person will do is to make all of those changes. But for me, and I think it's especially true for people who've watched a loved one go from, in my mother's case, a brilliant businesswoman, attractive, active, to basically a person who didn't recognize her own children, who couldn't feed herself, and who just dissolved a person. When you see that up close and personal, you're willing to do whatever it takes that you don't go down that same road. And that was my commitment. And for people who haven't personally experienced it, it is hard for them because at a certain level, they don't really believe that it's really going to make a difference. But I think that you have to trust the process. If you are concerned, and I think most people these days, if you read anything in the newspaper or you're listening on the internet, you know that Alzheimer's and other Parkinson's, Alzheimer's and other neurological disorders are seriously increasing. And there are reasons for that. So, you know, there are things that we can do is my message. And does it turn every case around? No, it doesn't. And do I call myself cured? I do not. I do not say that. What I say, which is truthful, I don't have any symptoms of Alzheimer's, which I had before, or memory loss. And that is the truth, and that's what I say. Would I wake up tomorrow morning and suddenly not recognize my grandchildren? I doubt it, but it could happen. And so I am very careful in choosing my words about it because I want to give people the right kind of idea about what is possible and what is not possible.
Judy, can you, you've touched on this a little bit, but I think a lot of people are concerned about getting genetic testing. And what do you think are what's the cost benefit ratio there? Because I know many functional medicine and integrative doctors really want to know your genetic information to try to more precisely treat you. But you had talked about earlier, like being denied insurance because, of your diagnosis at the time. What do you think about genetics? And did genetics come into play like in your own situation?
I think it's really important to get tested and to know your genetics. I mean, your DNA is you. It's what you are. It doesn't change. You only do it one time. And I can understand the concerns because my own experience, although it wasn't coming from a DNA test, we like to think that some privacy is observed, but these days, with everything getting hacked, you don't always know that it's going to be private. But I think knowing that your genetics, it's very, very important. And just things, it's not just about Alzheimer's, but when you do know, let's say, for example, if you have the ApoE 4 or even one form of it, then there are certain things that even in your diet and in how your body processes lipids and fats, it is very helpful to know that. And I think it also causes people to really sit up and pay attention if they have a higher risk. It doesn't mean they're going to get Alzheimer's. It just means that they have a higher than normal risk if they have APOE4/4 than the average person. So they sometimes then really get serious about doing something about turning things around. But there are also so many other things that you can find out from your genetics, even things like whether or not you're susceptible to a certain anesthetic if you're having surgery. And there are some people, because of their genetics, they might need just a tiny, tiny bit of it. And other people would react, would take a long time. And these are things that can come out of a very detailed genetics. And I did the Intellex DNA, which is probably the most sophisticated form of looking at your DNA, but there are many others. There are many other companies that do, they're less expensive, and they do maybe more of a reduced reporting. But I'm curious about my DNA, and I'm curious about how that might impact, and just things I found out about the methylation from my DNA. I couldn't figure out, my homocysteine, which is one of the markers of inflammation, and it's one that we work with a lot in trying to get our clients, our coaching clients, to get their homocysteine lowered, because it does show that you have inflammation in your body. Mine, because of the methylation, I could take a ton of B12 and B6, and it may not really work. So I'm always kind of on the cusp. I'm not really high. Well, as when I started with the protocol, my homocysteine was really very high. And it's now down to, I think the last time I checked it, and I do check about every 6 months, I think it was 9 or 10. So Dr. Bredesen likes it below 7. I've honestly never been able to get mine below 7. And I eat very cleanly. I mean, obviously I exercise a lot. So I'm saying that there are a lot of things that's very individualistic. And that's another reason that big pharma and then your traditional medicine, they don't like this. They don't like the protocol, but because they say, well, like if you're doing a drug test, you test one variable and you test a drug. And there's not one variable here. There are tons of it. It's about complications of your body and your brain. So, and it's different. It's a really personalized medicine, because I and my body and my genetics are going to respond differently. And my life experience is very different in what I've done and everything, even, my how I react to stress and so forth. So I think that we're getting to the point, people are starting to look at this. They're starting to open their minds a little bit and say, okay, let me look at it, because the only side effect of following this protocol is good health. And better, let me just say better health, because if somebody has already got, other chronic diseases diagnosed, I'm not saying that this is going to reverse everything, but, we've seen so many cases of people reversing type 2 diabetes, for example, and high blood pressure and obesity and a lot of other things. So it will definitely, the side effect will give you better health. And the drugs that are out there, the side effects are very scary. They don't promise, and they don't give you a cure. They may give you improvement for a period of time, and then you drop like a rock. When that drug wears off, I've seen people go absolutely down so quickly. And I know when the drugs were being approved and coming out, and I don't want to jump on any one particular drug, because it's not my job to be against pharma. I think some drugs are great, and we get an infection or whatever. We want modern medicine and we want drugs. I'm not saying that at all. But I read the flyer. When you get medication, you open it up and there's tiny little print. And you have to get I have to get a magnifying glass to read it, because my eyesight is not keeping up with the rest of me. It's not great. But I mean, it said right in there, the efficacy of this drug is 24 months. Okay. Does a doctor tell you that? No. It also says this is for very early diagnosed Alzheimer's. but they give it to everybody. And it's also not for a 4-4, for an APOE 4-4. It is not recommended in terms of the actual development of the drug. Neurologists just ignore all of that. And so there's so many people, the first time they go to a neurologist and they get a diagnosis, they get put on the drug or they get recommended the drug. And of course people are afraid not to do it. Of course they're afraid not to do it because it's scary. It's very scary. But I just urge people to weigh the benefits to the risk, is the way I look at it. And that's basically we have to do that.
Well, you've certainly touched on, why lifestyle factors are so important. And that is something that everyone can make improvements on literally starting today. And then there are these other factors, these other risk factors that have to be tested for and treated. Like you mentioned, mold or other infections, Lyme disease, or, if people have had trauma in their lives or they're under prolonged stress. So there are these other things that we can all look at or get the help of a doctor and have tested and treated. So I just want to shift now. Tell us why you were inspired to walk across America.
That's a question I get asked all the time. And I always say that I was just on my own walking about 3 months before I started my walk across America. And I was going on a walk down the beach. And I thought, I need a platform on which I can tell people, I can get people's attention and tell them that there are things you can do if you get a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. So that was one thing. I thought, and what could I do? I had a number of coaching clients, and occasionally I get asked to be interviewed, but it's very small in terms of impact. So I thought, well, I guess a person in their 80s walking across the country might get some attention. So that's what I did. And the second part of that was I felt like I wanted to honor my mother, because if my mother were alive today, she would be in this protocol 100%. We didn't have anything. She's been gone now well over 20 years. And as I said, she suffered 20 years. So there's really nothing that was available. And certainly we didn't know about it. So I wanted to honor my mother, and I wanted to just be able to speak about it, And I'm not an athlete. I was not especially trained for anything. And I couldn't even train for it because I didn't have an extra year to train. It took me 7 months and 10 days to walk from San Diego, California to St. Augustine, Florida. And it was fabulous. I mean, I loved it. I took one day off a week, and I had people coming up to me and hugging me and telling me their stories. And I have to say that I spoke to very, very few people, if any, who didn't have a story to share about a family member or a loved one. I mean, I would go into little gas stations and places to use the restroom or get some ice water, and they would start telling me, "What are you doing?" And I'd start telling them, and they would begin telling me about people in their family. So we have a huge need here, a huge, huge need, and I really want to get the word out that there's things you can do. Earlier you start, the more likely you can reverse. If you wait and somebody sadly is already in a nursing home, is already advanced, I'm not a medical doctor, and I always think hope springs eternal, but I would say if you've lost so many brain cells, then maybe it's too late. That's why we want people to get tested and work with a functional doctor if you can find one, work with a health coach, and improve your health,
So you're going to be walking across Great Britain.
Yes.
And tell us about your future plans.
Well, I am going to start walking across Great Britain. I'm going to start at Land's End, where the pirates, the Pirates of Penzance. I'm actually going to walk through Penzance. I love that. I love that opera. I love that story. And walk from Land's End to London. I'm going coastal, though. I'm going down through Dover and up to Canterbury, and then Canterbury to London. So it's across and up a little bit. My ancestors were from the Canterbury area, from Kent, and I thought it would be nice to walk there, and that's my plan. But it's a beautiful country. There are a lot of walking paths and small roads. I don't walk on the major roads. And I wanted to take the message to the UK because it turns out that the United Kingdom is number 2 in per capita number of cases of Alzheimer's. It is the highest cause of death for a chronic disease in the UK. And people there are very concerned. They're really super concerned about it. And I was just there last week as preparing for my trip and meeting with people. I was at a conference, a health conference, and I was honored to be able to go to Parliament and talk to some people there. And the National Health Service is very, very concerned. You know, what's happening. The numbers are increasing all the time. So I feel like I'm going to get a good reception, and I'm looking forward to doing the walk. And after that, probably some other countries in Europe. You know, my site is judywalks.com. You can all go there and see all the pictures and the drone shots of me walking across the desert in August, which was pretty crazy when you think about it. But yeah, judywalks.com. I think they're changing it to Judy Walks the World when I add the UK to it. But I'd love to get more people to really support what I'm doing. And while I was on the walk, I started a foundation called the Alzheimer's Survivors Foundation. So the reason for that is that we'll never convince anybody of this until there is a critical mass. It's just like with the women's movement, women's liberation, with civil rights, with anything. You've got to have enough people who talk about this and who say that this works. Otherwise, they say it's an N of one, and I'm not an N of one. So we already have in the foundation, we're getting many people to join and to share their stories. And we're just doing it to be a resource. We're never going to charge any money or anything, but we refer people out. You know, we're going to refer to Sharp again and your books. And I think this is what we need to do collectively. We need to be able to talk about it. We need to have community around this and to be able to share. So we're really looking for more people who have had these positive experiences and be able to share that. And I'll just keep, as long as I can, I'll keep walking. Plus that when I got home, after about a week of saying, oh, it's great to be home and in my own bed, I kept getting up in the morning thinking, I think I'm supposed to be doing something. I'm supposed to be walking. It was really hard. It's really hard just to sit still because I walked 8 to 12 hours a day. And I didn't run. I didn't walk fast. I stopped whenever I needed to stop. And I mean, it worked. And I love doing that. So I'm looking forward to continuing to walk.
Well, Judy, you are truly an inspiration. And I think what you've said is true, that it will take, I think it's going to be a grassroots effort. People and families are going to insist upon this approach because it's the only one that has been shown to work and be effective. And you know, and I don't think, and you referenced the big pharma and it's you know, the food companies. I really think it's going to take the public and our communities working together with others to really change this conversation and the way people are treated in the States on this. But your story is inspiring. We do understand so much more now about memory loss and what causes it. So I know that many people have written into the chat. And I think we can start now, Jessica, if there are some questions for Judy.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for that inspiring conversation, Judy Benjamin, Lisa Feiner. That was fantastic. Okay, so a couple of questions. We have one question asking about doctor recommendations. Now, it's my understanding that we are not able to make specific recommendations for medical providers, but perhaps Lisa or Judy can speak about some things to keep in mind when working to find the right provider.
Sure, I'm willing to take that on, and I think there are a couple of things you can do. In my opinion, a functional medicine doctor, somebody who's been trained to really look holistically at the whole body rather than the standard of care, is the best way to go. And there is the Institute for Functional Medicine, IFM, and they do have on their website, you can find, I think based on your zip code, you can find a doctor. There's also Apollo Health, which is apollohealthco.com. They have to add the CO in there because there's more than one Apollo Health. They also, to their members, if you put in your zip code or just request, you can find a doctor who has been trained in this methods, and you can also find a health coach. And I believe you can find a health coach also at the IFM. And that's one of the best ways to find a doctor. And our foundation will be referring AlzheimerSurvivors.org is the foundation, and we will also we're just new, and we're developing our website. We do have it active, but we're trying to expand our resources, and we will be able to at least give some places to reach out. We won't also be giving specific names because that just involves a lot of things that that probably we don't want to get into. But yeah.
Yeah, I would echo that. We have a section in the book about how to find a practitioner that also can be helpful. But I want to just say that there's so much you can do on your own to start with. If you do think that you have other exposures or other issues like hormone issues, or you've experienced either physical or emotional trauma that has not been treated. We know that is one of the underlying causes of memory loss and dementia. So seeking doctors who might be able to help you in that way is helpful. At the IFM that Judy referenced, there is a module called Reversal of Cognitive Decline that some of the practitioners have taken. And so when I am looking to help someone find a doctor, I'm always looking for that particular module in their toolkit, because I know at least they've been exposed to this multi-therapeutic, more holistic approach to reversing cognitive decline.
All right. Well, thank you both so much for sharing a little bit more to answer that question. And then from another audience member, she had shared that less than 2 years after the loss of their spouse, after an illness, my memory has changed. Again, we're so sorry for your loss due to trauma or loss. And they were wondering if the both of you could speak a little bit more about the impacts of loss and grief on memory.
Lisa, go ahead.
I'm going to take that first because I experienced this with my dad when my mom passed away. Now, he had started being forgetful, but had nowhere near a diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's or anything. But after my mom died, we saw a real dip in his memory. And that lasted for a good 6 or 7 months. And then he started to slowly come back to baseline, but ultimately he was diagnosed with Lewy body dementia, I would say about 4 or 5 years later. So it was kind of interesting to watch that. We do know that prolonged stress and grief, I think, puts a tremendous stress on the body and the brain. So that's something that I would say if you're experiencing or you have experienced, it does help to see a therapist or someone who can help you. There's so many grief or trauma therapists now. It's a whole new field, apparently, where people are really well trained to help address some of these issues. So I would just encourage you or someone you love to get some help for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add, also caretakers, people who are caring for someone with dementia or Alzheimer's, they are also at a higher risk themselves of getting Alzheimer's. And it really sort of combines all of those factors, the fatigue, the stress, and all of that. So they actually have a higher risk when they've spent a lot of time caretaking for a family member.
That's right. Not sleeping well, not exercising, not eating particularly well. Yes,
Right.
all of those things.
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you both so much for sharing. And another question that we've had in response to so many news articles about this, do these methods help with the type of dementia that Bruce Willis has had?
So Bruce Willis was diagnosed, I believe, with Lewy body dementia, the same dementia as my dad. And what I would say to you is, at the time he was diagnosed, I had already been doing this work for four or 5 years. So I would say that many of the interventions did work initially, but he stopped doing them because he was like 90 years old. It got to be very difficult for him. But he had sleep apnea and he was eating too much sugar and somewhat socially isolated. And I don't know, he had 4 or 5 things on the list. He wasn't he had never done any aerobic exercise at all in his life. And I was able to put him on some supplementation and get him a CPAP machine, which he did for a little while. And I would say, he passed at 97, still recognizing us. So he went downhill much more slowly. So I do think the interventions can be very helpful. I don't think we know as much about Lewy body dementia as we do about Alzheimer's. So the most success we've had is with patients who have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. But I do believe that a lot of the interventions are helpful and you could see improvement.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
All right. Thank you both so much for sharing so candidly. Well, we've gotten a lot of complimentary remarks as well on this discussion, lots of positive feedback. So thank you both again so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
I'd like to ask Judy, in your closing remarks, if someone is afraid of memory loss at this point, like I think we all have some degree of, a fear around our memories, and at any given time, because we're either sleep deprived or very stressed or whatever, we feel like maybe our memory isn't working so well. I mean, what parting words do you have for the listeners today?
Well, I think my parting words would be there is hope, and there's hope for everyone. I think everyone can improve their situation. I think we can be preventative. We can take a prevention, which is really what we really want to encourage everyone to do. Get tested, know where you're at with it, and know that there's hope. And what you just said is so true, that all of us will occasionally forget something, but that does not necessarily mean that you're on your way to Alzheimer's. I think that if you follow a good health plan, get yourself healthy, you're going to not only avoid the memory loss, but you're going to also not have some of the other diseases that are preventable. I mean, there's a whole list of preventable chronic diseases that if you take care of your health and you exercise and you eat right, you're not going to have. So what could be bad about that, right? So I just say the all the effects are positive. They're not negative. I don't know of any negative effect other than you get a lot of criticism from people who just don't understand, but that's okay. I can take that. So just get tested and eat well, and also be I want to say be social, be around people. Don't sit around by yourself. That's so important.
Yeah, so just I would just say also we just hope that this has inspired you and empowered you to maybe just take one or two small steps, even, this week to do something a little bit for your health, your brain health, and your overall health and well-being.
Absolutely. Well said.
Okay.
All right. Wonderful. So I think that concludes our webinar for today. Thank you so much to everybody for joining. And as we announced earlier on, we will be sending out a recap email with the recording to this session, as well as the resources that we spoke of earlier. So thank you all again. I will stop the recording.